Hello, everybody. My name is Neil Thompson. I am the founder of Teach the Geek. It's an online platform for science and engineering professionals. The first offering of the platform is a public speaking course called Teach the Geek to Speak. To learn more about it, you can go to teachthegeek.com. Again, that's teachthegeek.com. Today, my guest is Warwick Merry. He's a professional speaker, consultant, coach, and trainer. He's also the host of the Get Success podcast, where guests discuss how they define success and give tips on how to achieve that success. He's come a long way from his days in computing and accounting, and I'm interested to ask him about his transition from computing to consulting, his podcast, and of course, public speaking. Welcome to Teach the Geek Interviews, Warwick.
Thank you so much for having me here, Neil. It's great to be here.
Wonderful. So first question, where did that interest in computing and accounting come from?
Well, in the Australian education system, at the end of 10th year 10, we do a thing called work experience, where you go and work in a corporation for a while. I worked at Hewlett-Packard for a week, and I thought, and at the end of it, they offered me a job. So I thought I could do this IT stuff, but I wanted to finish my year 12. And I really had no idea what I wanted to be growing up. And this was back in the 80s. And so therefore computers were getting big. So I thought, all right, I'll go into computers. And I found out for an extra year I could get a second degree with accounting. So I got 2 degrees, accounting and IT. Very exciting.
Wow, that does sound kind of cool. Yeah, I don't think there's anything similar here, but yeah, that sounds wonderful if you're able to do some sort of, I guess, apprenticeship maybe for even a little bit after, a few years before you finish high school. It certainly can help in just kind of determining, your future career path.
Yeah, it was a way to sort of expose you to industry and how it works. And I've, lots of people in my life have done many, many different things. But for me, it was just a way to sort of get to know it a bit. Now, having said that, I had really had no exposure to computers. I had done a typing course in high school because I knew that I'd need to type in the future. I was one of the only guys in the room. And I'd done half a year of bookkeeping at high school. That's it. So based on those 2 experiences, I picked a degree in IT and in accounting. In high school, I'd done physics, chemistry, maths, English, all the sciences, so to speak. So it was a really weird sort of transition.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I learned how to type over a summer. So I remember, I think I'd finished, my 7th grade, and my father said over the summer I had to learn how to type. So I actually got a book from the library. I still remember the title of it, Touch Typing Made Simple. And the book wasn't even for computers. It was for typewriters. So I had to kind of adjust everything to computers because the book was all about typewriters. And he used to come home every day to make sure that I did I guess they had exercises every day in the book. So he'd come and make sure that I did all the exercises. And by the end of the summer,
what a great gift. I'm the same. I learned to type on a typewriter, and not an electric one, a manual one. And so you've got to really push, compared to now, it's just a basic sensitive. You've really got to push down. So it was a learning experience, that's for sure.
Yeah, not only you got to push down, you got to make sure you type correctly, because if not, then you got to get the whiteout out.
No, that's it. Whereas now autocorrect makes you type stuff you don't even want to do anyway.
No question. So, obviously you did that for a little while, but you made a transition. And so what prompted you to leave that behind and focus more on what you're doing now, speaking, coaching, and training?
Yeah, so I spent 10 years in IT. So I worked for a large company called EDS, Ross Perot's old company based in Dallas, Texas. And in fact, I spent 12 months there working in their marketing area. And I just found that, to be quite honest, I had a bit too much personality for IT. And it wasn't bringing me the joy and happiness that I was after. And so I started doing, I joined a professional association in the US. It's called the National Speakers Association. In Australia, it's Professional Speakers Australia. And I wanted to do some speaking. I've always been an orator. I've done amateur theatre, community radio. I was the school captain. So every Monday I'm doing a speech on stage. So talking comes very naturally to me. My wife would say too naturally, and I need to do less of it. But it just came very naturally to me. And so I went down that path. I was able to leave IT and get a subcontract job working for a training company. So they gave me their intellectual property, and I then presented that to the world. And yeah, look, it was great. That was 20 years ago. So for the last 20 years, I've been running my own business. I spent a few years with them and then developed my own intellectual property. I've written some books and CDs and all that kind of thing. And I found, and again, I still love being on stage. So I sing and I do a bit of improv and stand-up comedy. So I can use that in what I do. And the majority of my work now is actually as a master of ceremonies. So I'll host a large conference. So I'm the guy running on at the last minute when, 15 minutes early, the speaker goes, and in conclusion, and I'm like, oh, what do we say now? I've got to fill for 10 minutes. And for 10 minutes is a long time. So that's sort of how the transition happened.
Oh, wow. That is pretty interesting to transition from, because typically, I mean, people in IT, when you think of someone in IT, you're not thinking MC. You're thinking actually quite the opposite. Someone who doesn't want to go in front of anyone at all.
Correct. And look, and having spent that time in IT, I've been to enough presentations or conferences where you get the IT expert up there that knows so much and they are so smart and they just can't get it across. Their font on their PowerPoint slide is the smallest they can possibly get to get as much information as possible. They read it to you. The audience is going to sleep or playing gummy bear or something on their phone, and they think they're doing a great job. So it really is. That's what I love what you're doing with Teach the Geek is you've got to be able to communicate. Otherwise, why have the knowledge if you can't share it?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I'm laughing because I'm thinking about all the conferences I used to go to. So I worked as an engineer in medical devices, and I used to have to go to conferences. And when you go to those conference talks, you better go in there with some coffee or smelling salts or something, because if not, you're falling asleep quick.
And the thing is, these people are passionate about what they're doing. And so they might be talking about, I don't know, steri strips. And they're so excited about it. They're going into the molecular structure of the glue and the tape and the acetate that's used. And they're getting into it because they love it, which is brilliant. But they forget that there's an audience. And everyone's presentation is not about you. It's all about the audience. And how do I make sure I can get that information across?
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. So when it comes to I know you said that for the last 20 years, and you worked with a company with using their IP, and then you developed your own IP, and now you do your own trainings. What do you train on?
So for me, a lot of my stuff is around communication with the intent to influence, and also around success. And this is why I started the Get More Success show, because too many people around me were talking about how success equals money. And when I question them further on it, it's actually not the case. And there are some people I know with a lot of money who really are not that happy, and a lot of people who don't have a lot of money who just have an amazing, joyous life. So I wanted to just share the idea that there are so many different definitions of success and there is no one size fits all. So I've now spoken to well over 100 people on success and what that means to them, and then talked about their journey, how they got there, and try to accelerate other people's journey by learning from their tips and their failures, what they wish they knew, what did they do wrong, what did they do right, that kind of thing. So I talk a little bit about the success, how to define it, how to make it simple. And I'm just building new content at the moment around communication to influence, influencing for the purpose of good and not evil. So it is about how do you keep people engaged? How do you inspire your team to stay on track? I think we've all met people who've retired. They just haven't told the boss yet. So that their body turns up to work, but nothing else is there. So it's how do we keep them engaged and inspired in whatever the goal is? And if they're not inspired, to then look at what do we need to do to get them inspired? Is it a transfer? Is it a new job? Is it, because, life's too short to be stuck doing something you don't like. And sometimes you have to do that to get the money to pay the bills. So it's how can you build a life that does bring you joy and the inspiration?
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. So the training that you do, is it in person or is it online or is it both?
So being based in Australia, we have essentially the continent of Australia is the same size as the continental United States, but we have the population of Los Angeles. And so we are spread far and wide. So a lot of my training is done like this. Like yourself, I'm starting up some Thinkific stuff. I have some online webinars that I do. I have some mailing list items that send out different videos. I do a lot of different video work. But most of it is at conferences and conventions, I've got to be honest. So you'll go into a keynote or a breakout session at these conferences to to get those principles across. And then from that, sometimes I'll go and then work with the organizations and do some in-house work.
Okay. And when you did this type of training for the company that you worked for, was it similar in that you
No, there was all face to face. It was
Okay.
all face to face, and it was all based in the one city. And so that was for about 4 or 5 years. But that was all face to face, and that was back in the early '90s. So it was it was really at a time where that was trying to look at personal empowerment and choices in the workplace. When there was just that real sort of evolution of individuals could actually bring themselves to work and not just have to be a drone in Sector 7 doing all the work that they've been told to do.
Right. And the training that you do, I'm sure a lot of it is training to a group of people. Do you do one-on-one trainings as well?
Yeah, look, for me, I've got some one-on-one mentees that I work with, and typically they're face-to-face, something like this. But more often than not now, working with some of the organisation, it's group work. So I'll either go into the organisation and do group work, or some of the franchises I work with, they've got people all around the country, so we'll do group work online like this.
Okay. And the groups that you do the work with, do they tend to come from a certain industry, or are you pretty industry agnostic?
It's really all over, because a lot of the skills that I'm talking about are not industry specific. They really are looking at that the communication level around. Typically, it's a lot of sales elements of the organisation, and some of it is that middle manager or they're either new to being a team leader or manager, and they're trying to get better at how do I communicate to the team. Too often, I saw this in IT, and I'm certain you've seen it as well. If you're really good technically, a lot of managers will go, oh, they're really good technically, they should be the leader of this sector. But the skill to be good technically and the skill to be a leader are two completely different things. And so you get this really good technician who's just out of their depth and they have no idea what to do as a leader. So it's about trying to instill some of those skills and support them to take on that role.
In your opinion, what's the definition of a leader?
So this is really important, because what I find is, for a lot of leaders, there's that self-leadership, because often they're informal leaders. I think we all know, if you've got a team, there'll be one person in the team that everyone turns to. They'll be the person that says, oh, so-and-so's mother's gone to hospital. Should we do a whip around, get some flowers? Or it's so-and-so's birthday coming up. Let's just get them a box of chocolates or something. They're actually often not the formal team leader, but there's someone who just has influence and presence in the group. And they don't mean to do it. It's not something they set out to. How can I take control? It's just their nature. So there's a lot of informal leadership going on. Typically, a leader is someone who is going to help set the direction and encourage everyone to go down that path. Often what we need to do is take personal leadership. And I think all of us really need to look at, we talk about New Year's resolutions or themes for a year or certain goals that you might have set, and some people like goals, some people don't. There's no right or wrong, but there is about making choices, and you need to then have the consequences of those choices. So as an individual, you need to look at, what is it that I'm after? What do I want to do? You can't blame the company that you've been here for 3 years and never got a pay rise if you're not prepared to do a bit of extra learning or training or do something on your own bat. So there is an element of self-leadership. But there's also that informal leadership I talked about, but then the formal leadership of who is the manager who sets the pace. And too often in the HR world, there's a common conversation where people will join a company but leave a manager. Because often if the manager is just rubbish and if they don't treat people well, you leave them because of that individual. You might like the company, but not that person. So it is about making sure that your leader, your formal leaders, are supporting everyone and not trying to stand on their shoulders and take all the credit.
Yeah, for sure. I had a recent guest on the channel, and she talks a lot about leadership too, but more from, I guess, women's leadership. And I asked her a question, and I was really interested to get your take on it too. So, as I mentioned, she does a lot with women's leadership and better ways in which women can, become leaders. And I asked her, if a woman is leading a group of men as opposed to a group of women, does she lead them differently? And because whenever I think of leadership, I think about it's more about the people you're leading, not necessarily the actual leader. So would a male leader and a female leader, if they're leading similar groups, lead them differently? What's your thoughts on that?
I've had both male and female leaders in my time, particularly in the corporate world. And I've got to say, I'm a much better fan of female leaders than male leaders. Now, personally, I do better communicating with females and mixing with females. I don't know what it is. I just get their energy better. But what I find is the female approach, and this is a huge generalization, so please, no hate male, is I find they're more nurturing. I find they're able to show they care more, and it's not seen as a weakness. Whereas for a lot of men, there's this macho rubbish of like, got to be tough, got to, come on, you can do it. And I just think there's a lot more support, nurturing. So I find for female leadership, I prefer it personally, and I think it gets better results. The challenge is, and again, with my recruiting buddies, I'll talk with them and I'll say, one of the challenges that females face is if you're going for a job and it says, these 10 things are a requirement, a female will look at that and go, oh, I've only got 9. I haven't got 10, so I won't go for it. A male will look at it and go, I've got 2 of those, I'm in. And just, and it's a different perspective.
Yeah.
And so I think it behooves us to get out of our own, whether male or female, whatever, demographic you're in, get out of our own roads and just look at, okay, what do I want and what value can I bring? And just because they say they want 10 things, you might be bringing something that's not on the list that they haven't even thought of or aren't even aware that they need yet. So yeah, I really think it's about how you position yourself. And I'm a huge fan of nurturing the team. And it's that whole, if you can get your team to help you achieve and you take less of the credit and more of the blame, you're going to go a long way and you'll create a loyalty. Like there's some of the leaders that I had that if I got a phone call tomorrow saying, hey, can you come and work for me for a year? I'd be like, not a problem. Where are you? Because they were just so awesome as individuals and as leaders, because it wasn't all about them. It was all about us. And I think that makes a huge difference.
Yeah. Me even thinking about gender at all actually stemmed from a presentation I gave in front of the Society of Women Engineers. So they had a conference here in San Diego where I'm based fairly recently. And I was talking about public speaking for engineers. And then at the end of the presentation, the first question I got was from, it was all women obviously in the audience. And she asked me if I tailored my presentation to female engineers specifically. And I honestly the answer was no, it didn't even occur to me to do that. I was tailoring it to engineers in general. But so the idea of thinking that women engineers would have a different, would I guess benefit from a different presentation to male engineers never really crossed my mind. So that's where that whole, women and I guess male thing came in.
And that's the thing. It's, there is a different, it's the principle of it. It's like, I don't care who you are as an individual, there's information that we may need. And look, granted, there are some things that may need to be tailored to a different demographic, be it, male, female, ethnicity, whatever it is. But most often it's not. Most often people are people and the same issues exist no matter what. And I think it behooves us to look at how can we support everyone. And having said that, I'm a 6'3" white male in Australia. So I am the power position. I don't know what it's like to be discriminated against. My wife is Sri Lankan and we travel to Sri Lanka a little bit and I'm in the room. I am the only white man in a room of about 800 people at some of the functions I go to. And at no stage do I feel like a minority because I've never had that perspective. So therefore, for me, it's about how do I promote that mindset in others? So sexism in the workplace, I believe, is a male issue. It's because we've created it, so therefore we've got to help dissolve it. So that becomes making sure people are heard, all people, male or female, and making sure that if someone is dominating the conversation, that we put a stop to it and say, I want to hear other people's opinion. Who else has got something? You were interrupted. Can I just get, your... And so it's up to the people in a position of power to make sure that they use that for good and not evil, to make sure everyone's heard, that everyone's voice gets across, that points are valid, I think that's so important.
Yeah, for sure. When it comes to your podcast, how do you come up with episode topics?
Well, see, for me, my podcast is very very simple. I'm a simple man. I don't like to complicate things too much. And so what I've done is I start the conversation. Every one of my podcasts starts with the same question, which is, how do you define success? And from that answer, then comes the conversation. So we'll talk about the history of what the person's done, some of the wonderful experiences that they've had, mistakes they've made, how they've learned from the mistakes, what they do differently, what are the challenges in the industry that they face. And from that, build almost a to-do list or a suggestion list for the listener. Because because I'm communicating, I don't want to just, say to that person, you're amazing, how wonderful are you? Tell me more about how amazing you are. I'm very conscious that I've got listeners and I want them to be able to walk away with, here's 3 things I can do differently. Here's the stuff that this guest wishes they knew 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So if I can know it now, I don't have to make that mistakes. I've always said, I don't have time to make all the mistakes that need to be made. And mistakes are a great learner, a great teacher, because I don't have the time. So if I can learn from the mistakes of others and shortcut that process, I will happily do it. It's why we listen to podcasts, read books, find out. It's to look at what are some of the struggles people have had and how they got around them, how they identify it sooner so they don't actually have to face it. So that's the kind of content I'm trying to get for my listeners. And I try and get a cross section. I'm very connected in the speaking world. And so therefore I've got quite a few speakers, but I also want to get non-speakers. And so I get, it's the different engineers like your good self and different people, managers, different people from different parts of organizations, just so that there's a great cross section. Because what I want is I want people to listen and go, that's me, or that could be me, or I think like that, or I'm like that. So I can then take away those lessons.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know you said that when people think about success, perhaps they think about, some think about money, but it's not really about money. But do you ever get guests when you ask them, how do you define success? They actually say money, and then you have to kind of try to convince them maybe it's not money?
No, but the thing is, for some people, it is money. And money's a brilliant scorecard because it's quite easy to go, well, I've got $1 million and you've got only $100,000, so I have more. So it's an easy scorecard to measure. And for some people, that is how they measure success. And that's not good or bad. It just is. And for them, if that's how they measure it, they then need to examine, okay, well, what's the impact of that? Because I'm the firm believer that every choice has a cost. And if you are, and I've had, people in my life, I've had some friends who've worked huge hours. They've worked for a big corporation. They've been working flat out all the time. One day, and my friend came home early and his wife said to their son, here's dad. And the kid ran to the phone because he's so used to talking to dad on the phone. So, it's like if money is your driver and you work massive amount of hours in the day, there's a cost. Every choice has a cost. And if you're willing to pay the price, fantastic. But you don't get to say money is most important to me and I work really hard hours, but it's really sad I don't have a family. It's like, well, you can't complain about it because that's a choice you've made. And if you want to change that, you've got to make different choices. And it's not right or wrong. There's no good or bad here. It's just, money is just money and stuff is just stuff. But I find the older I get, the less for me life is about the stuff. And it's more about the experiences and what I can give and how I can share with others because, that I really enjoy that. I've just, in all honesty, I've just applied for something, a theatre production that's going to be based here in Melbourne. And because as I said before, I do a bit of stage work or whatever. And financially, it's going to be much worse for me. But if I'm one of many auditioning. I don't hold my hopes too high for this, but if I get it, it's going to be an amazing thing to have on my list of accomplishments, so to speak. And I will enjoy that process as I do it.
Oh, wow, that sounds kind of cool. Well, you mentioned that I've always been pretty good at public speaking. Your wife says maybe too good. So, do you have a process for developing your presentations? And if so, what is it?
Yeah. So for me, it's sort of, I learned this from a guy by the name of Doug Maloof, and he calls it the apple tree approach. And basically, you've got a tree, you've got about 6 apples on the tree, and each apple is a point. And then for each point, you then need 3 bits of information that back that point up. So once you've worked out what are the 6 items you want to talk about, each of those items has some backup information. You then need an introduction and a conclusion. And then on top of that, and this is the last thing you create, is a sexy headline. Because most people, if you're at a conference or if you're at an event, you're competing against other presentations. So you need some kind of almost a clickbait headline, but not so obvious now, because I think we're all aware of clickbait headlines and we just go, oh gosh, that's going to be rubbish. But you need some kind of sexy headline that's going to attract you or just pique your interest and want to go and see it. So that's the very high level process. But essentially, I've seen too many presentations where people go, right, I have this information, I've got to get in there and give them everything. And they've got a half-hour presentation and they just dump. It's like having a drink from a fire hose. It's just this gush of information. Whereas most people, you can't take it in. Like if they walk away from that presentation with one thing that they can do differently, you've done a great job. So for me, it's like, if I can say, if I'm there for half an hour, I like it like 5-minute chunks. So if it's half an hour, I'm going to have a 2-minute intro, 3-minute outro. So then I've got another 5-minute chunks to deal with. So there's 5 points that I'm going to talk a couple of minutes each on the supporting items. That's going to be enough. And someone will grab something out of that. So it's less is more, less is more. And more often than not now, they want to be entertained, not educated. So it's got to be fun. Someone once, I asked a question once, should you make them laugh? And the answer was, only if you want to get paid. And I think that's really important. If you think of all the great speakers in the world, there's a laugh in there somewhere. It's not a stand-up comedy routine by any means, but there's a laugh in there. And there's an emotional roller coaster. So once you've got the basic outline, to take it to the next level is you got to take them on a journey. You got to do a bit of storytelling, that kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I know you said that you tend to be really good at public speaking, but do you ever get nervous? And if so, how do you deal with those nerves?
It's really interesting. I'm now at a point, because I've done so many presentations and from many different sizes. I think my biggest one has been 3,000 people in the room. And I've done in weird and wonderful locations. I hosted a gala dinner on the Great Wall of China. I've done presentations in Abu Dhabi, Germany, all around the place. So having had that much experience, I don't get sort of super nervous. But what I do is I start to get sort of on edge, if that makes sense. So I'm starting to go, okay, this is what's going to happen. And particularly as an MC, because you never know what's going to happen. And I've had anything that you can think of, I've had happen as an MC, and not all of them good. But the most nervous I've ever been, at the Melbourne Fringe Festival, I did a one-man show on a gentleman by the name of Gough Whitlam, who was the only Prime Minister in Australia who was sacked by the Governor General. And he's a very well-known figure in our politics and almost folklore. And so I did a one-man show where I was on stage for 50 minutes and it was just me. And the first night of that show, I was so nervous that I was nearly fainting. I could feel all the blood rush to my legs. And it was just a matter of just breathing, just being present, and just really being focused on how can I make sure I give the audience who have chosen to be here, paid money to be here, the absolute best that I can. And we did a season run of that and had sellout shows. And by the time I got to the end, I was so relaxed and I had sort of tried to really embody the character. I started throwing in little one-liners and really enjoying it. But that very first time is always the hardest. No matter what you do, I find the very first time, because it's so unknown and you don't know what's going to happen and anything could happen. But it's just a matter of just breathing and remembering it's not about you.
It's about you, yeah. What about you? That's absolutely true. Is there anything else that you want to tell the audience about things you're working on, Warwick?
So for me, at the moment, look, the fun stuff that I'm doing is the podcast, the Get More Success Show. And as you said, at getmoresuccess.com, I've got a new book that I'm working on, so Get More Influence. So it's about how to have influence when you're talking with people and leading people to try and get the result that both they and you are after. Look, apart from that, what I would suggest to people is if they are wanting to communicate their message more, they might be a geek, you know, and the only way to get better at it is doing it. So any opportunity that comes up, put your hand up, go for it. If there's an opportunity to present in front of your team, do it. If there's an opportunity to present, maybe you've got kids at the local kindergarten or childcare and they want someone to talk for 5 or 10 minutes about the future of the child or the kindergarten, take the opportunity. The only way to get better is to do it. You can't get a book and read the experience. You can get the knowledge and you can get the structure, but you've got to do it. So that would be my suggestion when it comes to conversation is do it. There gets the time when you've got to stop there's so many people I know, and you see this, you'll see them watch YouTube and they'll go, oh, I want to I don't know, use a lathe and make a wooden bowl or something. And they'll watch so many clips, but at some stage you've got to do it. And I would say to people, if you want some of these things or you want that outcome, you've got to do it.
Absolutely. How can people get in touch with you, Warwick?
The best way to get in touch with me is through the website, warwickmerry.com, WARWICK, Merry as in Christmas.com, or check out the podcast at getmoresuccess.com.
Excellent. Well, everybody, that marks the end of another episode of Teach the Geek interviews. My name is Neil Thompson. I'm the founder of Teach the Geek. It's an online platform for science and engineering professionals. The first offering of the platform is a public speaking course called Teach the Geek to Speak. To learn more about it, you can go to teachthegeek.com. Again, that's teachthegeek.com. Until next time, take care. Thanks, Warwick.
Thank you so much, Neil.